Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies and our favorite film franchises. I'm your host, Cody House. Today, we are returning to a filmmaker that we sort of closed the books on around this time last year at the beginning of award seasons when Nightmare Alley came out, but we already knew this one was in the pipeline. And today we are discussing Guillermo Del Toro's version of Pinocchio, which is on Netflix. So, fair warning, if you are watching or listening to this, we will get into spoilers. I mean, I feel like you sort of know mostly the story beats of this, but it is a bit different of a tale. And today, to discuss that with me is Colin Smith. Welcome, Colin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get started on the movie itself, what is your thoughts on Guillermo del Toro himself as a filmmaker? Are you a fan? Do you like his body of work generally?
Yeah, I'd say generally I do. I think I've enjoyed most of his films. I don't necessarily love all of them. I don't think there's any, I'm trying to think if there's any I don't like. I don't think there are. Um, I was just thinking because I was about to watch the new Inarritu movie. I was just thinking about sort of the famous Mexican directors that get a lot of attention in the English-speaking world, and definitely Cuarón is my favorite. Del
Okay.
Toro is probably my second, and then and Inarritu I'm sort of all over the map with. So, but I think I've basically enjoyed most of his movies, and always look forward to something new when he comes out with something new. Um, and even if I, like with Nightmare Alley, for example, I didn't love it, but I still really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed a lot about it, even if I had some sort of nitpicks about it. So generally, I like his work and like what he does. I haven't watched all of Cabinet of Curiosities yet. Um,
Oh,
have you seen it all?
yes. It's
Okay.
it's overall, I'd say the whole series is pretty darn good,
Oh, good. I've enjoyed what I've seen so far.
but I feel like, and we'll get into this later in the discussion, but I feel like Del Toro is probably the best person at this point to do any kind of Lovecraftian type of horror story. Even though I know he didn't write and direct most of these, but he did put his name on it and produced it. So I know he had a heavy hand in kind of curating these little shorts.
Well, I mean, there's been talk about that forever, and I would love that. I keep hoping that it's going to happen one of these days. So, I mean, he's the kind of director though that announces a lot of projects that end up not ever happening. So, I don't get super attached to any idea yet, but that one keeps lingering, and hopefully one day there'll be Del Toro's Mountain of Madness, and we'll get to see what that really looks like. And I bet it'll be incredible, whatever it turns out to be.
Yeah. So you talked about the three big Mexican directors. I feel like a lot of people are that way. I mean, I know there are people that kind of really love Inarritu, but for the most part, it seems like people are like either Cuarón Del Toro or Del Toro Cuarón, and then they're
Mm.
like, I'm kind of hot and cold on Inarritu, depending on the movie.
Yeah, that might be true. I mean, I've been a Kieran fan like since way back, and I'm not sure there's I'm not sure there's any of his movies that I don't love. So for me, he's one of those special directors that just I always get really excited about, and just speaks to me in a cinematic language that I really appreciate. We all have those directors, right? That whatever they do, it hits us. With Del Toro, I can take or leave some of his, but like I said, I think I've enjoyed every movie that I've seen of his, some way more than others. I actually think, and this might be a bit of a hot take, um, that Shape of Water is my favorite of his films. I there's just something about, like, and I just remember being so surprised by how much it moved me, and how much I really loved it. Um, and and I know that other people have, there's others of his films that are sort of more popular to like, but I adore that film.
I don't think that's a hot take because not only did it win the Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Director for him, but I also think it's kind of a perfect melding of his more mainstream or US films with the type of storytelling he did with his three Mexican films.
I think that's really good. I think that's a really well said view. I think maybe the only reason I said it was a hot take was because I think sometimes after a film wins a bunch of awards, then there's the backlash, right? And people are like, "Well, that's not his best film," or "That's not, that didn't deserve to win," blah blah blah, whatever, right? And I was thrilled to see it get it because I really liked it, and I still love it, and every time I watch it, I just you know just adore it. It's just so it's fairy tale like, and it's also dark. It's got dark elements, but not too much. It's got the creepy fish sex stuff that just is a bit weird for people to handle, and the performances are great. And I don't know. For me, it's probably my favorite. But I enjoy a number of his other films as well. So that's just probably my favorite. I
So
don't think
interest
Pinocchio overtook it, is what I'll say.
Okay. Well, we'll segue, but I just wanted to bring something up since you mentioned and yeah, there usually is some sort of backlash, either if something is being favored to win or something eventually wins. So the most interesting backlash about Shape of Water winning, other than some people saying it's not his best film, which, that's a matter of opinion, really. But I understand, a lot of people are stands for Pan's Labyrinth, which did not
Yes,
get a Best
right.
Picture
And
nomination.
is an amazing film too. I love that film too. Yeah.
But the funniest one to me was, it was the safe choice to win Best Picture. It's like, I mean, I totally get if you go back and look at all the nine films, there's a very strong argument that Get Out probably should have been the film to win Best Picture. But I'm sorry, a movie where a hearing impaired woman has sex with an amphibian man is not,
Yes.
which is totally a minor point in the movie of everything else
I
that's
know.
going on. But in no way, shape, or form is that the safe Academy choice.
100%. You're right. And
Like
and and as much as, yeah, you could be correct, and I think people could make a very compelling argument of why Get Out should have won. I'll give you another hot take. Get Out is my least favorite Jordan Peele movie. Now, having said that, I love all three of them, so it's not like I don't like it. It's just that for me, I've both Us and Nope hit me even better than Get
you,
Out did.
you're
So
appreciating the swings he's taken with those two movies, I
that's
guess.
right, very much. Yeah. So yeah, no, there's a lot of films of his of Del Toro's, going back to this director, that are really good. But and like I said, this one, Pinocchio, is not going to be my favorite, but I don't think that necessarily again means that it's bad or that I didn't like it. It didn't grab me in the same way that some of his other films have.
I'm gonna be in agreement with you. So let's get into this because this is getting a lot of really high praise, and it looks like it's going to win Best Animated Feature.
Yeah, which it wouldn't be my favorite of the year for animated features. But I still really like it. And I'll say this, like maybe to say sort of an opposite hot take. I think this might be my favorite Pinocchio movie. Um,
Well,
so
it's definitely the
I'll,
best Pinocchio movie of 2022 for sure.
yes, that's true. That's definitely true. And I mean, I'm not just saying that because I just had the painful experience of watching the other Pinocchio, not too a few months only a few months ago, but I actually I've always tried. I'm a big Disney fan, but that for I've like from when I was a kid, their Pinocchio, which I understand is a classic, and many revere it as one of the best animated films of all time, but it never rang true for me, and I always struggled with it. And I think there's some things inherent in the story of Pinocchio, which we'll talk about, that undermine my enjoyment of any adaptation of it. But I think when I was watching this, I remember feeling like it was speaking to me maybe a bit more than the classic that everybody thinks about, the Disney version that everybody thinks about. I didn't make it all the way through. I will confess, I didn't make it all the way through Alberto Benigni's Pinocchio, so I can't really comment. But
Well, I haven't
if I
even
did,
seen that one, which I didn't know until the Academy Awards that that movie existed.
yeah,
Which I guess he's done that twice now because there's a version of him where he played Pinocchio, and then in the most recent he played
yeah,
Geppetto.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get that Pinocchio in Italy is a very important cultural piece of work. I remember being in Italy and seeing statues to Pinocchio in different places. Um, but again, yeah, like it's never been one in terms of childhood stories, or that are part of our personal sort of canon of favorites. It's never been one for me. So in fact, I remember being very upset as a kid watching the original Pinocchio, the not the original, the Disney version of Pinocchio. I remember the scene on on Pleasure Island is just so disturbing, and I remember just being so upset during that whole scene. Um, yeah, and the film just over again. Speaking of the Disney one, just has this overall message of you know being a good boy and following the rules, and I think just all of that bugged me, even as a little child. I think before I could maybe articulate more why it sort of bugged me. Um, Del Toro takes a bit of a different approach with that here, so I think I appreciated that.
So that's an interesting thing to bring up. And I will say, of as far as the differences between this and the classic Disney, not all the other iterations of Pinocchio we've seen for decades. I think the one
Yeah.
fundamental thing that I like about this movie more than the Disney version, and I know they've done this with different takes before, this isn't the only one to do it, but we have a reason Geppetto creates Pinocchio in this movie with losing the death of his son Carlo
Mm-hmm.
because of World War One, and it's out of grief that he creates Pinocchio. And I believe the boy's name is Carlo because that's the name of the original author of the fairy tale.
Okay.
Which, knowing Del Toro, this movie is a bit closer to that classic tale than the Disney version.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Geppetto in the Disney version, there's this sort of idea that he's a bit of a lonely man. It's sort of suggested. It's not overly hit over the head with it, but there's a suggestion that he's a lonely man, and he creates this toy to have a son because he's on his own. And you can see him being very, I mean, yeah, very enthusiastic about being a father. But the this one with sort of how Pinocchio is sort of born out of this grief and fit of emotion, that was definitely powerful. Dark, again, I think that while I think older children could really appreciate this, I think it could be quite upsetting for very young children, or maybe very sensitive children. But I think that I did appreciate that it certainly leaned into some of those kind of emotions around sort of the loss of a child. It's sort of one of those things that's one of the most upsetting things we can imagine in media or literature, right? And so to lean right into that and start your story there is a bold move for sure.
Absolutely. And thing I think, because yeah, this one didn't quite attach to me as other Del Toro work, but or other animated films that came out this year. There are two other animated films I had a little more personal attachment to that I would say is better. But the sheer production design of this movie is a labor of love. You can tell that like Del Toro and oddly the Jim Henson Company who did the stop motion puppets, because I watched like a Sunday morning interview with him, and they shot a lot of this in Portland, so I was like, did Leica help with this? But no, it's the Jim
Right.
Henson Company, and like
Right.
it's just amazing to watch. And I didn't go see this on its brief theatrical run. It was only playing like at one theater around my area, but
Right.
just watching it at home on my TV, I was like, wow, this is like just sheer scope and masterfully done. Like just the
Yeah.
look of the movie.
Yeah, I love stop motion. Again, it's a bit of a nostalgia thing from my childhood and watching the old, like what Rudolph and the Christmas specials. And I mean, I love stop motion animation, and I love the Leica films. The This one is incredible to look at. The art direction's amazing. The puppets are beautiful. The animation is great. I love all of that. And it's interesting. The design of Pinocchio itself is interesting because he does sort of appear rough, which again, based on how he's sort of brought into being, makes sense compared to the more smooth and polished puppet that the Disney Pinocchio is.
I love that Pinocchio is literally wood, that he is made out of wood, and like when his nose grows, like it grows like a tree branch, and like
Right.
there's leaves and like life
Yeah.
on the branch as it's growing. Like I really enjoyed that look. Not only because, oh, well, this is a different take on the character. And plus, if you want to put your stamp on something that is so iconic to the world, not just, pop culture of
Mhm.
North America. Pinocchio is known all over the world.
Yep.
Like that look is, everyone knows what Pinocchio looks like, even if they've never seen the original 1940 Disney film. They know Pinocchio. So,
Right.
and of course, Del Toro is gonna go in kind of this look and atmosphere, because if you notice, like for example, this is very similar to some of the work we see in Hellboy 2 with like the elves and that kind of world. And
Mm.
interesting, when he was developing this movie, he originally wanted John Hurt to voice Geppetto, which would have been incredible. But,
Mm.
sadly, we lost John Hurt
Right.
a few years ago. But I think David Bradley does a really good job as
Yeah.
Geppetto.
Yeah, he's an interesting casting choice. Again, a lot of us know him in villainous roles, so it's interesting to see him in a more sympathetic character. I was impressed. I actually remember looking him up at one point, thinking, "Okay, who is this voice again? Who's doing Geppetto again?" And then looking and going, "Oh, right, that's who is doing it." And I was a bit surprised. I was a bit taken, but I thought he did. I mean, I think the voice cast here is great all around.
Well,
Um,
speaking of a voice actor you probably didn't know, but you might have, because you might have looked it up or read before. Kate Blanchett is the
I
monkey.
know, I know. I got confused. I was talking about this with someone recently, and I was like talking about Kate Blanchett. I'm like, oh no, you mean Tilda Swinton? And then it was like, no, I forgot. Kate Blanchett was in this too. I had forgotten that. Because
Well,
yeah, it's interesting that you would go to the trouble of getting Kate Winslet and then just have her do that sort of a voice. But maybe it was really fun for her. I don't know. I can imagine it must be.
well, the thing that happened was she's of course wonderful as the sort of femme fatale in Nightmare Alley.
Right.
They were working on that, and she's like, "Well, I want to do something for your Pinocchio movie," because it was kind of already announced that he was developing or doing
Mm.
Pinocchio at the same time Nightmare Alley was being made, and he's like, "Well, the only role we haven't cast is the monkey," and she's like, "I'll do it. I would play a pencil for you." So apparently
Yeah.
she loves working with him. Like, I guess she had a really good experience. But I mean, generally overall, I feel like Del Toro is a well-liked person in the industry. I don't know anyone that like has anything bad to
Yeah, I've
say
never
about
heard
him.
negative things about him, and I mean, it's certainly you do hear a lot these days about people that are difficult to work with. So it's I wish we heard more about people who were great to work with and were a pleasure to work with. We should be encouraging that, right? But yeah, no, I've never heard anything bad about him. So I'd love to see the videos of Kate Blanchett doing her reads in the studio. Like, I think it would be so much fun to watch. There would be just, I mean, she's an amazing person to watch on the screen. I would love to see her, what she looked like while she was doing the monkey.
Right? Like, what were those voice sessions like?
Yeah,
Yeah,
really
really
fun.
the only negative thing I've heard about Del Toro, and it's not really negative, it's just maybe he was just younger and kind of just not thinking like how to pitch a movie. But when he like pitched Blade 2 to one of the producers who was female, he was referring to like the vampires, like the mutated vampires, like the
Right.
apparatus when they
Yep.
as to female anatomy.
Oh, okay.
So that's like really the only negative thing I've heard about him. But like I said, I don't know if that's really like bad on him, or maybe he was just that passionate and younger and wasn't really reading the room of how to like pitch the idea and use his words better.
Right, right.
But
Yeah, well, I mean, the cast is great. I remember feeling a little bit. I mean, at first, I think Ewan McGregor didn't hit for me when the cricket started talking, but I think I got used to it by sort of midway through the film, and then I was fine. I don't know why that stood out for me a little bit, but for some reason that was pulling me out of the movie a little bit at the beginning.
well, I kind of find this a much better voice performance than he did in the Beauty and the Beast as Lumiere.
Okay.
And it's definitely better than whatever Joseph Gordon-Levitt was doing in the Zemeckis version, which I guess he was trying to imitate whatever, I forget, but the guy who did Jiminy Cricket in the Disney
Right,
movie is some sort of
right.
world famous voice actor, and I think he was trying to do that folksy.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
McGregor's just soothing, like he just uses his natural
right,
voice, and it's just kind of soothing and welcoming as the character.
right. I
And
do. Yeah, I really struggle with the Disney live action adaptations of their films. I find that they're like the idea of sort of copying what came before just doesn't, I don't know, doesn't do a lot for me. I find them really hard to get into and enjoy. And like I do enjoy adaptations of stories that bring something new to the table, and which I think this definitely falls into that category in a few ways. Visually, certainly being one of them. Again, often I think most of us in this part of the world and in of a certain age sort of think of the Disney Pinocchio as the authentic version, but I mean in reality that itself is an adaptation of a story that again, when I was in Italy and seeing statues of Pinocchio, he didn't look anything like the Disney version. There was a very different sort of presentation of what the puppet looked like, but it was clearly recognizable that that was Pinocchio. And I think we um, on this side of the Atlantic think maybe have different perceptions of uh, of this character and this story that are based very specifically on this one property. And so it's I think this film is being a North American film is still is it's great that it takes such a different approach to many aspects of the story. If I understand correctly, the original story was fairly episodic. It may have been serialized in its original, and so and every adaptation I've seen does do that. Pinocchio goes from one sort of calamity to another, continually getting in trouble. And each one sort of picks some different story. Some of them are the same. This one had the puppet show and the whale, or well, I don't know what kind of animal it was in this movie. It was certainly uh, it looked more like a big fish than a whale, but it was but still, I mean, they brought in those elements which were sort of familiar, but then they added in some other ones that were less familiar, and I appreciated seeing Pinocchio have to go through some different hurdles this
Yeah,
time.
so let's talk about what makes this one a little bit different, and definitely different from the novel as well as not as other adaptations. So this does not take place in the 1800s like most versions of Pinocchio does. This takes
Right,
place in what, 1930s Italy, right before World War II. We're dealing
right,
with fascist Mussolini time,
yep,
which makes this kind of a trilogy capper to Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth, even though it's Italy instead of Spain now.
right. Yeah, no, I think it's. I mean, obviously, Del Toro has an interest in exploring uh, the. Um, I mean, before it was the sort of Spanish language culture's history with fascism. And this one, of course, is Italian, but I mean, it's related for sure. And so he definitely has an interest in exploring fascism, and Pinocchio is an interesting story to bring that in because this is a story about a puppet that doesn't have strings. So I mean, there's a metaphor there for, control and how to behave, and that's interesting for sure. That I think is a great way to explore some of those themes that he's interested in around totalitarianism and around fascism.
Yeah, and it makes sense that like when they find out, because not only dealing with fascism and the eye views of children, this movie deals with like those other two with death and kind of grief and how we function and deal with those things.
Yeah,
And it makes total sense that when they find out that because he's a wooden puppet, like he doesn't die, he comes back to
right.
life, that the military would be like, oh, we have to use you and make you the
Yeah,
perfect soldier because you can never die.
right, right. That was interesting. That part, and I don't know if that's it appears anywhere else in any source material or not for this, or if that's original to this story. I've never seen that before that I'm aware of. And I think, and that was, I mean, it was interesting because the film does meditate on death a little bit, and both in that, but in some ways in a darkly humorous way. And some of his like dying and coming back, and going to the afterlife and coming back was quite funny, and was a bit of a nice counterpoint to some of the sadness that was associated with death in the rest of the movie. I really liked how it ended too, how it ties back to those themes. Like it starts with death and the creation of Pinocchio out of that grief for that, and then it ends with Pinocchio having sort of grief and needing to like move on because not only Geppetto but the rest of his family passes along, and he sort of
Mm-hmm.
has to continue on. And there's still like, it's an optimistic ending, but in a much more melancholy way than the ending of Disney's version, where he becomes turned into a real boy who probably will die if you think about it that way, which the movie doesn't get to. But they have a little celebration. He's now a real boy, and they can be a real family again. Some issues I have with that story, but this one doesn't do that. It goes beyond that. His realness isn't tied to being made flesh and blood. He doesn't have to conform to sort of what the other children are like to be able to be considered real. And he instead gets to go on being his true wooden self. And then, like I said, he has to say goodbye to the family that he has who are mortal and pass on. And so that was I was very interested in that ending. I thought that was fascinating take, and I like that it was still sort of optimistic. It doesn't end with the line, but I think that the narrator says something. I think they embraced him wherever he went or whatever. Like it was at least a sort of a positive kind of an ending.
Right. And I think another beautiful thing about that ending is not only like, okay, so it wasn't that he had to become flesh and blood to be human or to be loved. It was that he was willing to sacrifice himself for the love of another person, like Geppetto and Spazzatura and Jiminy Cricket, like, or Sebastian Cricket, I believe is his
Right.
name in this
Yes.
one. And it also comes with that, like, your family is not always flesh and blood. Sometimes the
Right.
family is the people you choose who love and accept you for who you are as an
Right.
individual.
Right. And also with the ending, I was thinking too, in some ways, it's sort of referring to the story and the legend itself, right? So that he goes off into the world and is loved and accepted in other places. And I think that that's something about the story itself, you know, sort of translating into many different languages and becoming something that the whole world can, you know, relate to and enjoy, and not just be sort of specific to um, Italy and where it came from.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people are being emotionally connected to this movie or saying it's their favorite version of Pinocchio because it's giving you those beats. And nothing against the classic Disney version, because, you know, regardless of your opinions where you land or fall on it, it is one of those landmark films for the company. And I
For
mean,
sure.
just the song alone makes it iconic. It became, you know, the Disney song, you know.
Yes, I mean the music is amazing for that I mean, not just that, but I've got no strings. Like it is strong in so many ways, and visually it's like artistically it's an incredible movie. This one being in a different medium helps with comparison, so you're not sort of comparing directly, which is good. I will say the music was, for me, a bit of a detriment. I didn't feel like any of the songs, and I know that isn't one of them sort of considered a, you know, sort of a strong contender to get nominated for an Oscar, but I just none of them hit for me. And maybe if I watch it again, I'll get like maybe I'll start appreciating them more, but I can't say that I loved the music in this. And I think I might have preferred it if it wasn't a musical. They weren't terrible songs. I just didn't feel like any of them really stuck.
I would agree with you. I was kind of taken aback because I didn't know it was going to be a musical, sort of.
Right.
Like, I didn't know they were going to. I was like, oh, and like they're fine as far as
Yeah.
like within the
Yeah.
story, but like I'm like you, I didn't really like oh, I'm gonna go listen to these songs later,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
I'm
Which
like,
that, you know, with Disney, you often the music is one of the stronger elements, right? That's something that they tend to do really well, not always so much. Um, and just again, maybe it's not fair to compare, but I mean, it's hard to top the music that was in the 1940s Pinocchio. But the again here, they were bad. They fit the story. They serve their purpose. I like musicals. I like when characters break into song. I like when songs advance the plot and or potentially give us insight into characters. I think music can do a lot in movies, like songs with actual lyrics can do a lot in movies to you know, really help move the story along and bring us closer to the characters. I just felt like none of these were remarkable. None of them are the kind of things I'd want to hear outside of the context of the film, and that's fine. Like I said, that's they do what they need to do, but you know, they might have been able to do those things without music. And you know, yeah, who knows? I don't know. Again, not terrible, just wasn't the strongest part of the film for sure.
I agree, and I believe the song that is favored to get a nomination, because I'm looking up the Critics' Choice, not is
Yeah.
Ciao Papa, which I
Right.
don't even remember that
Yeah,
song.
I need to go back
So
and listen again because it didn't stick out for me, right? So
I think the
yeah,
only song I remember is like the first one when he talks about like all the things he loves. Like he just loves
right.
everything he
Right.
sees.
Yes, that one again, which the name isn't even sticking with me, but
Hmm.
it's yeah.
I'm I mean, I did find it funny that he decides to sing a song making fun of Mussolini when Mussolini shows up.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
And I think Christoph Waltz does a really good job as that character. I know they're kind of mixing the fox and the whatever the character's name was that is the guy
Right,
that kind of kidnaps Pinocchio or swindles
right,
him into being a performer.
right, right.
Because we don't have the whole Pleasure Island sequence either in this
No,
movie.
which, like I said, I don't mind. I mean, I get the point of it again. I think as an adult, like as a kid, I found it upsetting. As an adult, I look back and I think I'm not sure I love the messaging that goes along with that little anecdote of the story. Um, but I think I think there's I, I I wasn't sad that that wasn't part of the story.
Yeah, so how do we feel about the rest of the voice cast? I mean, so Ron Perlman voices like the military general or whatever his title is. I mean, that's, it's a good role for Perlman.
Yeah,
I don't know if he's doing anything extraordinary, but it's just nice to see Perlman because he's kind of, I guess,
he's
Del
always
Toro's good
great.
luck charm.
Yeah, I always enjoy him and everything. Whether it's just his sort of, I guess it's more than a cameo, but his part in Pacific Rim is delightful. It's one of the best parts of that movie. The I mean, he's just always enjoyable to see. You're right though. I don't know if it stood out. I think if I hadn't looked him up, I might not have recognized that it was him. But maybe, I mean, that's a good thing though, because then he's
Hmm.
acting, right? Like he's serving the role, and that's great, right? Um,
Hmm.
and again, like there's a number of characters like Tim Blake Nelson, John Turturro. Like
Yeah. Tim
I
Blake
recognize,
Nelson's the rabbits
yeah,
in the underworld. Like I didn't know that. I had to look
yeah.
that up. I was like,
Like
oh.
there's the Ewan McGregor's and Christoph Waltz that you recognize, and you hear the, and Tilda Swinton, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
you recognize them. They are, and good casting in each case. Like I said, Ewan was a bit off-putting for me at first, but I think I got sort of used to it. But Tilda was perfectly cast, I think, in her two roles. Um,
Absolutely. It's kind of
and
interesting that Tilda and Kate are both in this because I feel like they are both performers of similar, not just talent, but how
right,
they can both
yeah,
be elegant and beautiful, but at the same time, very androgynous. Like I
and
could see the,
otherworldly in a
yeah,
way, right? Yeah, for sure. Um, Definitely. I mean, Kate is currently, I think, the favorite to get Best Actress this year. And I mean,
still haven't
it's
seen Tar yet.
okay.
So,
Well, I would say it's well deserved. It's not. I mean, I enjoyed the film very much. It's not one of my favorites, but I mean, she's just excellent in the role, and it wouldn't be bad at all for her to be the winner. She's certainly earns it. She's great, and she's always great. I mean, I'm trying to think of a time when I haven't thought she was brilliant. So,
hmm.
um, and again, I really love Tilda as well. I mean, I really enjoyed her sort of cast against type in 3,000 Years of Longing this year, um,
Oh,
which in some ways she was not what you would expect from her, which I really appreciated, but also still like still the oddball character that you can see her sort of playing, but uh but in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before. So that's always nice.
I I don't know if that movie is kind of being a mixed reaction, but I'm definitely more on the very positive side of that movie, not just
Me
for
too.
the sheer visuals of the movie, but the two performances.
Mhm.
And I love that it's just about storytelling, and I love
Yes.
that it's also one of the few movies that actually acknowledges that COVID is in the world.
Right. Yes, without like making it a point, just
Yeah, it's just
acknowledging it. Yeah.
naturally she's wearing a mask, or you see people
Yeah.
wearing masks in the background. And I oddly found the movie sexy too, maybe just because it's
Yeah.
Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton. But
Right, right. Wait,
like,
which is not a combo that most people would pick out of a lineup, but it worked, and I thought it was just really interesting. Yeah. So she's again just an actor who can bring to just such an interesting and fascinating presence in any movie, and I think that here, again, she does stand out as being Tilda Swinton in the movie, but she also, I think, is just embodies the character so well, the characters, because she plays two of them.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, she doesn't. I mean, there was times I was questioning: is she really playing two characters, or are we supposed to see potentially these characters as being somehow two sides of the same? Sort of. Who knows, right? I
Mm.
think you would look at it a number of different ways, but officially, she's two characters listed in the credits, so we'll go with that.
Yeah, you could make an argument that they're a yin and a yang to the personalities of one being, more about the death and the underworld, and one being more of like,
The
life and.
life in the because it's the forest,
Hmm.
it's a verdant area of. So yeah, I was kind of thinking of it that way, but again, I don't think it's not a question that needs to be answered to enjoy the movie.
Hmm.
The question, and contemplate it. Yeah, yeah. Which is great about this movie. It doesn't necessarily answer all the questions either, which I think is great in movies that are for all ages, because sometimes I think a lot of films either aimed at children or aimed at trying to have audiences of all ages sometimes do try to make things kind of black and white or obvious or clear exactly what's being meant and said or done. And I kind of like it when there's a little bit of interpretation that is possible. And I felt like he certainly infused this movie with that.
Um, did you know legendary voice actor Tom Kenny was Mussolini?
I did not
I
know
did not
that.
know that till I just looked at the cast, which I didn't know John Turturro was in this either till you mentioned it.
Well, and again, I'm just looking at the cast list myself. So I get there was a number of voices in here that I didn't pick out because those actors were simply, like I said, embodying the character and playing the role and not necessarily being themselves. And I mean, when in animation, you can have and they can both be good. You can have the sort of Robin Williams as the genie performance where the character sort of is the actor and is they become sort of all tied up in one. And then again, I use that example because I think it's an iconic, like, cinematic character and voice performance. But you could also have character like actors like Alan Tudyk, who will be like different in every voice role that he plays, and he's always amazing in all kinds of different kinds of parts, and you wouldn't necessarily you'd have to look it up to know that it's him. And I think both are valuable and both play their role in animation, as an art form, right? Both of those kind of performances. So, and I think we have both here. We have the Tilda Swinton sort of embodying a character and being recognizable as Tilda Swinton, bringing her Swinton energy to the role, which adds to it. And then you have these other actors blending into their characters, and to the point where you don't even know who they are, and they're just being those characters. So I think it all works.
Yeah, another person I'll just point out before we move on was I always forget his name, and he's been in a few Del Toro projects now. He's a British actor. He plays the priest, Bern Gorman. I did recognize his voice, but I always forget his name till I look it up. He's like
Yes,
he's
right. He's also in Del Toro, previous Del Toro films, right?
hmm.
So I mean, clearly Del Toro has his stable of actors that he likes to work with, or they like to work with him, who he's bringing in here, which is great.
Hmm. I want to get your opinion on something. I've been hearing a lot of comparisons about
Okay.
this, about Del Toro's specific version to this. Apparently, this is a classic, beloved story for him that his mother read to him as a child, and he's been wanting to tell this story most of his life. But a lot of people are saying that his version is very similar to like Frankenstein. Like it's kind of him putting elements of
Mm,
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein into the story.
right. I hadn't thought of that. I don't think that's necessarily off base. I mean, there's a certain amount of how the world reacts um, to him, and the you know, I mean, to me, one of the essential questions in Frankenstein is, just because we can, should we? Right? Like
Hmm.
that is sort of one of the questions. But then there's also themes around being an outsider, people being afraid of what they don't understand. I mean, there's so many themes going on in Frankenstein, right? To me, there's overlap for sure between these stories, and so I don't necessarily think it's would be wrong to incorporate some of those themes
Well,
into this story.
and I mean Victor Frankenstein ultimately, I can't remember if it's actually grief. It maybe because I do believe he loses his mother, but I think it's more of him like trying to cheat death instead
Right.
of like grief. But very similar
Like Anakin
circumstances of grief.
Skywalker.
Yeah, like trying to cheat death. But yeah, I can see the similarities, and of course, Del Toro always has a soft spot for what is deemed the monster or creature, and
Yeah,
like they're really the monsters as humanity because of their fear and acceptance of things they don't understand. And
right.
so, and yeah, people are like, when's he going to do his own Frankenstein? Or would that even be interesting? I think it would, but I would like him to do more original stuff than kind of doing things we've seen
Right.
50,000 times.
But yes, except that I think there are certain stories that just, if there's a that that they're open enough to interpretation that they can be rich experiences each and every time, or maybe they're not all rich experiences, but there's always the potential for there to be interesting takes and things. And I mean, Frankenstein I think fits that. Clearly Pinocchio, like, again, Pinocchio has never been a story that resonated for me, and so I've always struggled a bit with the love for it. It's not one that I've loved. This film helped me appreciate it in new ways, to the point where I actually, maybe the first time I really enjoyed the story. And for that in itself is I was happy for and thankful for, right? Like, this is a story that means a lot to him as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, and the fact that he got me to care about it, I think is, was, not because it cares what matters what I think, but because he was able to get people who weren't fans of the story to appreciate it. And if it's a story you love, that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's not only is it interesting that we got these two different versions of Pinocchio in the same year, but apparently Del Toro was attached to the Witches remake Zemeckis did a couple of years ago, which
Interesting.
now you probably have to scour the depths of sand and time to find, since HBO
Right.
Max removed it. Not that I like that movie, but I have issue with you like just totally removing something that was made for your service.
Right.
But
Well, I mean, I think I'd be curious to see what a Del Toro witches story would have been, because again, we're looking at dark source material that's like a children's story, but has definitely dark undertones to it. Um, I'd
and
be
the
curious
Henson
to see.
Company did the puppetry for the Nicholas
Oh,
Roeg film from the
right,
1990. So
right,
that's
right,
another connection between these two movies.
right,
But I think not only is this movie stronger because it's a different take, but it's a clear vision from a filmmaker, and it's using the technology they're using to enhance the story. And I'm not here to poo-poo on Robert Zemeckis or what they're doing, but that is clearly just them kind of copy and pasting a movie that already exists and not really
yeah,
using the motion capture technology to its fullest, which is sad because Zemeckis used to be one of the groundbreaking directors with technological advances. And it seems now he's just more obsessed with the technology than enhancing his films on a
right.
storytelling level.
I mean, Zemeckis made one of my favorite movies of all time, the Who Framed Roger Rabbit. which again still holds up. Like I watch it now, and I think it holds up visually and certainly the storytelling in it. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to poo-poo him either. I think he's made some amazing films. Like most directors, he's also made some that just don't speak to me. And and it was a challenge with Pinocchio already, since for me that wasn't one that I was going to be like super excited for. And also the fact that I so far have not been able to get into very many of these, again, I put in air quotes, live action, because I mean, can you really count the Lion King remake as live action?
No,
But,
no, not really, because it's all CGI.
yeah.
But you know what? I am deeply fascinated of what Barry Jenkins is going to do
Yes,
with a sequel to this.
that movie is like up there with Greta Gerwig directing Barbie, where I go, what is going on in the world? And I'm very curious as to what it's going to come out of those sorts of things, right? Because it's just one of those things that I never would have put together in a million years. And I'm open to seeing what they can do. Like, yeah, as much as I'm not a fan of Favreau's Lion King, I'm definitely, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Barry Jenkins, and I'm open to see what he's going to do with it. It's a Mufasa origin story or something, like it's a
It's kind of
prequel.
like the Godfather 2 style of
Oh, okay.
storytelling. Like it's
Okay.
gonna be Mufasa origins post Simba struggling to deal with being like king of Pride
Okay.
Rock.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll see it. I'm open to seeing what can be done, right? So
Right. I mean,
um
that's
who
just a
knows?
wild choice. I'm like, okay, Disney.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess coming back to this film again, t- taking an artist who has an interesting vision and applying it to a story that maybe we have experienced before in some way. I mean, this shows that there can be some real interesting and transformative possibilities, right? Again, this probably won't be my favorite animated film of the year. It will, but it won't be like in my top 10 of 2022, but it's still a film that I enjoyed and probably my favorite Pinocchio film. And there'll be a lot in, I'll probably revisit this film and watch it again, and get more out of it the next time, right? So I confess I only watched it once before coming to
Me
talk about
too.
it.
I only watched it once as well.
And I
So
do like to I do like to not fully make up my mind after only seeing a film once, but I think I will revisit this at some point in the future, and probably enjoy it again, and probably get more out of it that I didn't get the first time. So there's a lot to that. I am curious with films like this, because animation especially, but also films like this that have sort of an international footprint in a way. Yes, it's an American film, but it's by a Mexican director whose first language isn't English, even though he's clearly fluent in more than one language. And it's based on an Italian story set in Italy, to a point that I think probably more effort was done to make that authentic than perhaps some other American films that are set in different countries. So I'm curious to see what the reaction from Italian and or Spanish speakers would be to the dubs in those. Can you still call them dubs? Because in animation, like all of the performances are dubs in a way, right? Like
mm-hmm.
even whatever language it was originally intended to be in. Um, I'd be curious to see, because sometimes the experience is not the same with a different cast. And sometimes the language translations are not the same. I think there's been a
Mm-hmm.
number of times when I've watched films in languages that I understand when I'm reading English subtitles while watching them, and seeing that the way that certain phrases are turned has a different implication than in the two different languages. And so I'd be
Mm-hmm.
curious from in this specific scenario, how if there are different references. I mean, again, the Italian experience might be more personal. There might be more, because it is set in very recent history in the scheme of things. Italy is still affected by its fascist past, and so I'd be curious to see how an Italian audience would react to this, and again, maybe a Spanish speaking audience, since Del Toro is a filmmaker who speaks to that audience as well.
Yeah, and I think it going to Netflix, not only because they were probably the only people that would finance this movie without cutting budgets. I think it dropping on Netflix will definitely help with its kind of maybe international appeal. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it's interpreted and translated, and hopefully it's presented, because that is one thing I hate about Netflix for the most part. When you watch a movie that's intended in a different language, it's dubbed. There's only been a few where it automatically plays in the language
Right.
it's supposed to be in.
Well, speaking of that, Bardo, which just dropped today, if you're watching this on the same day as we recording it, probably not, but it is only available with a Spanish audio track.
Well, that's good. I know. I
Netflix.
think they did that with Roma as well. But I had people tell me, "Oh, you got to watch All Quiet on the Western Front. You got to watch it." So I watched it, and I could have went back and changed my subtitle settings to German, but I was like, "Let me just see how it plays." And I wasn't as emotionally involved in it as a lot of people, and maybe that's part of I watched it in English, and maybe I need to go
Right.
back and watch it in German.
Right.
But
Well,
I was
I
like,
can say it. I was that. So I mean, I'm a huge fan of the 1930 film, and I have to say this one really hit me. But maybe that you're right. Maybe it's partially that, because dubbing throws me off. I don't like dubbing. I prefer subtitles. I find that when you're watching a movie with subtitles and you're hearing the actual actors live action anyways, the actual actors speak their lines, you start to hear in your head the English words in their voice, and it starts to feel like your brain does some magic that makes it sound like you're hearing them speak to you in English. And I find that dubbing always throws me off because it's never quite lined up, and a lot of dubbing actors half-ass it. It feels like they're not in character in the same way that a lot are, and that's not universal. Sometimes you get really good voice performances, but often you don't.
mm-hmm.
So I find it takes away from the movie by listening to it dubbed.
Yeah, the only time I think dubbing has been done well is, well, it's animation with the Disney cuts of Ghibli. I think
Right.
they've done a really good job with those dubs. But live action, yeah, and 9 times out of 10 never really is as good
No.
as the natural language.
No, exactly. So I definitely, I mean, with animation, I tend to watch them dubbed, just because, again, technically they're all dubbed. And you're right, they tend to, sometimes the voices are, so I mean, I've watched a few films in languages other than English that I understand, animated films in dubbed, but I don't, but yeah, it'd be weird to watch an animated film subtitled, I think. I can't remember ever doing that. So,
well, this movie, a lot of people were predicting it was going to get a Best Picture nom, but I think it's kind of out of the Best Picture race at this point. I think
I'd be surprised.
I would be surprised too. It seems like Netflix is putting all its money in Glass Onion getting the Best Picture nom,
Yes.
which I won't get to see
Right.
till it drops next week. But from what I hear, it's just as
Me
good as the
neither.
first one, if not better by some people.
Well, I'm actually
So,
hoping. Here's my hot take: is that I actually think that Knives Out, while great, falls down a little bit in the middle. I know people love that movie, but I think that for me, there's some weaknesses in it a little bit. But I still really enjoyed it, and I'm very excited for Glass Onion. I didn't make the theatrical release because it was such a limited period of time, and there were so many other films that I wanted to see, and I knew that one would be available in a few weeks, so I just left it. And I'm eager to see it though, and I'm looking forward to it.
You did the same thing I did a few years back when we were visiting family in Arizona for Thanksgiving. There's a really cool theater in Tucson called The Loft, and
Okay.
they even like put the director's name before the movie.
Right.
And The Irishman was playing. I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
that's
right.
really cool." I was like, "But that's going to be on Netflix." I was
Yeah.
like, "But Parasite's playing. I'm going to go see Parasite," which I'm sure
I
all of
think you
my
made the
wife,
right
my
call.
mother-in-law. Yeah, I was like, I think I made the right call after watching The Irishman. No disrespect, but they would have been so mad at me if we watched The Irishman instead of Parasite. Because I was like, yeah, I made that choice. I was like, it's going to be on Netflix. Like, I'm going to be able to watch it. Like, it'll be available to me. Whereas
Okay.
I don't know about Parasite because it's a foreign language, it's an international film.
Yeah, we didn't
Yeah.
know at the time it was going to blow
Um,
up as much as it
yeah,
did.
this is probably. Yeah, I didn't even know prior to the Academy Awards that it was going to win Best Picture or Best Director. I'm like, it's probably only going to win one or the other. I was like, I still think they're probably going to go with 1917 because that's more the movie to go with. But yeah, it stormed everywhere, as well deserved because it's a masterfully done movie. But before we finish, yeah, this looks like it's going to win Best Animated Film. I won't be mad if it does.
No.
It is a deserved win, but if it was up to me, personal preference, I would give it either to Marcel the Shell or Turning Red.
Me too. I love both those movies. I'd probably
Those two
give.
films hit me more.
Oh
Those
yeah. I think for me, Marcel, I'd probably give the edge to, but I really loved Turning Red. I'm, it's interesting. I don't know what's going on with Disney and their animation department and Pixar in terms of like their issues with releasing stuff. Like I really enjoyed Strange World. I don't know why they didn't seem to promote it in any way whatsoever. I thought it was a fun film. Not as much. I enjoyed both of those films more than Strange World, but I still really enjoyed Strange World. I'm hoping it'll catch an audience on Disney Plus when it hits there, I think also next week. Because I think it's a fun movie that was very enjoyable and has a lot of interesting things to say, and visually was quite spectacular. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with, Disney, that's their bread and butter. So I don't know why they're not releasing their films. Either they're not releasing them in cinemas, or they're just like with Turning Red, they just put it straight to Disney Plus, or they're not really promoting. I don't get it. I get that Lightyear was a disappointment for them theatrically, but that doesn't mean everything's going to be. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what happens.
That's a podcast for another day, and I think
Yes.
it is the whole issue with their recent CEO and why the other Bob Iger has come back.
Right.
I think for whatever reason that CEO had something against animation. It's like, well, then why are you working at Disney? Like that's
because even their live action movies are animated. Whether it's Star Wars or MCU or Avatar, it's pretty much all animation.
Yeah, they have branched out since they started, and they did live action movies back in the day too, but they're always going to be synonymous with animation. That is what Disney is known for, and that's why they've been considered at the top tier of quality for animation.
Yeah.
So, but before we go, you mentioned it, and it's circling around right now because when Del Toro won his Oscar, everyone was like, well, this is the moment in time for him to finally make At the Mountains of Madness. He's won the Oscar. This is the time. He is circling back at saying he might do this now as a stop motion animated film. And I feel like that's fine. I know a lot of people would like, I'd rather see this in live action, but I'm like, if he can get it made and he has to do it in stop motion, let him. And if Netflix is willing to put up the cash for it, I would love for him to finally make this movie, even if it is in stop motion. Which
Oh,
is
I would
funny.
too.
I saw something on Facebook where somebody did like a version of it if Jim Henson had made this movie in the 80s with stop motion puppets. I was like, that's kind of, did they align this with the news or did they?
I would watch that too. From the sounds of it, I would love. I'm a huge fan of Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, so I would have been all over a Jim Henson Company production of this. But I mean, I don't know. I think I would love him to see him make this. If he thinks he can do it in stop motion, I love stop motion. I would watch that. I would love to see a big budget, special effects laden version as well. I think it would be. I think it's a story that's ripe for a great. I mean, people think these things are problematic, but you just need to find the right, like whether it's Lord of the Rings, finding the right director to really come to life on the big screen after like decades of nobody being able to do it right, or Dune is another great example of it just never really clicking until you just get the right filmmaker behind it. And just they just has to, the stars have to align, and it feels like this is a no-brainer. Del Toro and that story are a no-brainer to make it happen, and so however he decides to do it. Can I bring up one thing since you were talking about Netflix? Like, I do think that this whole streaming service revolution has opened up opportunities for certain kinds of films that we might not have gotten any other way, or just large audiences would never have had a chance to go see. And I can think of some of my favorites over the past few years that probably wouldn't have existed without there being a streaming service. But we're starting to see that bubble bursting. I think, I mean, HBO Max is sort of on the cusp of it. Really the canary in the coal mine of just not working, and the financially. And I'm worried about, like, certainly Prime has deep pockets and they can just throw as much money. Apple has as much money as they can just throw at whatever. But like even Disney and Netflix, I think I worry about them not being able to maybe fund some of these side projects where we've gotten some really interesting stuff outside of the big tentpole stuff they're throwing into the theaters. And I'm worried about that going away, because films like, whether it's this one that we're talking about today, or a potential Mountains of Madness movie, or other films that just, if they're not the MCU or Mission Impossible or Fast and Furious, just not having, not reaching the audience. For a film like Coda last year, which, controversially maybe wasn't the best film of last year, but was still a great little movie, for it to get the kind of attention that it got was a good thing. And it, in the
Yeah.
old model, where it would have gotten a platform release through like art house cinemas, and then nobody would have, like, so much of the audience wouldn't have seen it. Like, I'm kind of sad that the streaming thing might be imploding a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's on the cusp. I mean, HBO Max is a whole issue of like the merger and everything, and people not really understanding art over commerce. I think Apple and Amazon have a lot of money, so they'll probably be okay. And Apple is very selective of what they put on their service. Like they're more about quality instead of quantity, which
Right.
is which is a good and bad thing for their service, but that shows you how amazing Coda winning, because I know a lot of people that don't have Apple
Right.
subscription.
Right.
It's not one. I think, yeah, it's always every year everyone's like, when is Netflix gonna bust? Because they're like in
Right.
debt. How much money
Right.
do they have? But I think
Right.
that's also why they have so much random stuff on there that goes straight to the service,
Right.
because some of this stuff a lot of people are watching. I'm like, I have never literally heard of this. What is this? And it's like
Right.
one of the most what. So
Yeah.
I think
Good
that's how
point.
they. I think that's how, I don't know how long they can sustain it, but I don't.
Right.
I think that's how they're able to get like these, passion projects from these big name directors that normally probably wouldn't get. Like, I don't think The Irishman would have happened without
Not in the
Netflix.
way that it did. It would have,
R-
yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of projects like that that either they would have gotten made, but maybe in a different way, maybe for less, maybe more compromised. And again, the audience just wouldn't have seen them. Like the thing about Netflix is that it does give a platform that so many people can access, right? I just saw the Banshees of Inisherin hit. I think is it HBO Max in the US,
Yep,
and
that's
it's
where I
Disney Plus
finally saw.
here in Canada.
Yeah,
But it's because it's a Fox, no, not Fox. It's a 20th Century, isn't it, production? So
yeah.
I'm surprised that it didn't hit Hulu or Disney Plus down where you are, but here it's Disney Plus, and a lot of people are now going to watch it and it's an amazing movie. And a lot of people are going to watch it who wouldn't have gone to the theater to see it. Of course, I went to the theater the day it opened because I was eager to see it, and I loved it. And but I mean, people aren't running out to the cinemas to see movies like that, but
Well,
they will sit down Friday night with with their partner or their, maybe not their family for that one, but and they'll watch these movies, right? And I'm I think there's pros and cons to the whole streaming thing, but it does seem like financially as a model, it's a hard one to make work. And I am concerned if it does crash that we're going to get less of these kind of projects. Because even if Pinocchio wasn't my favorite film of the year or my favorite animated film of the year, even, it was still a film I'm glad I got to see. I'm glad it came out. I'm glad it got made. And I know that there's more chance for films like this when there are more options for distribution than just the theatrical model.
yeah, and in defense of movies like Banshees, which I loved because I finally got to watch it. Yeah, this probably wouldn't play well in a large market, but also for someone like me who wants to see these movies, I live in an area where these movies don't ever get played in the theater unless like they start doing either really well or awards things. So
Yeah,
getting to watch them on streaming is kind of the opportunity for me to see these kind of movies. So I feel like I have more access to movies now than I did in the past, where it's like, well, this movie doesn't come out rent till such and such, you
right.
know.
Yeah,
But
I'm lucky. I live in a city that's large enough that we pretty much get all the movies, and I love going to the cinemas. Like I said, I went to see Banshees in cinema when it came out. I go to a lot of the small films. I saw See How They Run, which is a good film. It's not great. It's whatever it is, but it's enjoyable enough. And now it's also available here it's on
mhm.
Disney Plus here. So again, I'm telling people watch it. You'll have a good time. The I saw it in the theater too. I go see a lot of movies in the cinema, but I like the fact that, again, not everyone has access to that, or maybe the financial resources to do that. I get
Mhm.
that it can be expensive to go see a lot of films in the cinema. So I think there's a lot of pros to streaming, and I hope that somehow
Which
they
I
find a
think
model that
is
works.
which I think is also the issue with which was an issue before the pandemic, and I think even now more with post-pandemic. I think it's not just people not being interested. I think it's also people being like, well, I can't afford to go see everything I want to watch. What
Yeah,
am I willing to spend my money on that's worth watching in the big movie theater? And sadly, it is those bigger
yeah,
spectacle films because
yeah,
you're like, that's my bang for my buck because
yeah.
it's not going to play the same way on the
No,
small
I would
screen. Whereas,
recommend, if you're going to see Avatar: The Way of the Water, see it on a big screen. Don't wait for home release. Um, a film like that, you'll get more out of at the movie theater.
which, yeah, I saw Banshees. I loved it. I thought it's probably the best screenplay of the year that I've seen. I love the dialogue, but I loved it watching it at home. I would have loved it in the theater, but it's fine to watch at home. Like
Yeah,
it's not like, oh, this had to be seen on the biggest screen possible. Like it plays well at home. It might play
yeah,
better at home because you're not in an audience. Because like when I saw Nightmare Alley, I went to see it even though it dropped on streaming like a few weeks
Right.
later. Like
Right.
it didn't announce that. I went and saw it, and there wasn't very many people in the theater. But I remember when it ended, some woman went, "Ugh, that was it."
I mean, I like seeing comedies, and I do think Banshees of Inisherin is a comedy, even if it's dark as well. It is a comedy. I laughed quite a bit, and I like seeing comedies in a cinema with other people because the laughter is infectious. So I do like that. But again, I've actually now watched it both in the cinemas and at home, and I can tell you it was as enjoyable in both places. It's an excellent movie. Definitely go see it or watch it on streaming, or if it's still playing. I think it's still playing here in cinemas, some of the cinemas. So if you don't have Disney Plus, you can, or wherever it is in the US, you can still see it in cinemas and should go see it. I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but I just thought since this was a Netflix movie and the kind of movie again that maybe benefits from having the opportunity to be on here, that this would be an okay time to discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine. It's part of the nature of filmmaking, and because it's a new movie, we kind of had to bring up kind of like it's because it's circling in there. And so, yeah, these are semi-related topics, but I'm glad this movie exists. It's not my favorite Del Toro. I don't even think it makes my top 5. It'd be somewhere in the middle for me.
Me too.
But I'm glad he got to make this. I can tell it's a labor of love and passion, and it's shown on the screen. And I'm glad Netflix was willing to fit the bill because I think this movie almost didn't get made because people didn't want to finance a stop motion movie that's going to cost this much to
And I'd
make.
probably recommend it to people. I'd probably say, yeah, if you're interested in it, watch it. It's good. I wouldn't tell people to skip it.
No, I think if you like either Pinocchio, the story itself, or you're a fan of Del Toro, or
Or
you're
you
a
like
fan of
stop
anim,
nation. Yeah.
yeah, there's various leagues of people that could get enjoyment out of that, and maybe some of these all intertwine. But yeah, I'm glad this movie exists. I think he did a really fantastic job. He's always a passionate filmmaker, and I hope he gets to keep making movies he wants to make. And I appreciate that he is a passionate filmmaker, but at the same time understands the market and people's reasonings. I remember when Nightmare Alley wasn't doing well, he implored people if you can to see it in the cinema, but he understood if you couldn't go or didn't feel comfortable. He didn't pull a Christopher Nolan and demand
Right.
that you have to go see this movie in the
Right.
cinema.
Right.
So I appreciate he's a more practical thinking person, even though he loves movies and is passionate about his art form. That
Yeah,
he's a
I
generally
agree.
nice person.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Thanks for letting me discuss it with you. I enjoyed the film and, of course, the discussion.
Yes, thank you for coming on. I always love our discussions. You have a very good insight and opinion on things,
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
it's a very topical and lovely conversation. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And if I don't talk to you before, have happy holidays and have a great new year.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, this is dropping right now on YouTube. I'll probably post it on the Facebook and Twitter pages later. I believe they're doing a Christmas episode Sunday on Krampus and Gremlins, and then we'll be wrapping up Ridley Scott later this before Christmas with House of Gucci before we move on to Henson, Oz, and Ron Howard in the new year.
Lots of fun stuff.
Yes. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Colin, thank you for coming on, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Bye bye.
Bye.